Well, Colin Cowherd is over on Fox Sports talking about the dogs. One thing he said that was in a conversation with Joel Klatt the other day. I think a lot of people share this. This is what Colin had to say. You're not going to run it 42 times and jam it down Georgia's throats. It's not going to happen. It's not happened this season so far, and it's been a while since it has happened. I think the last team that really had a lot of success running the ball against Georgia was the 2020 Alabama team, and it took them a while to do that. When you think about this season's team, and just you go through the litany of games, I think the UAB game was probably the one game where Georgia allowed the run more than you would have suspected. But at the end of the day, that UAB team only had about, I think, 120 yards. I think in 2020, um, the Gators ran effectively enough. It wasn't, all of the time. And one reason why Colin Cowherd is talking about that is, that's what people think Michigan is going to have to do. They think that they're going to have to run on the dogs, and we'll just see. I mean, it's always hard to totally know what someone's going to do, but it does. I mean, I think there's no question that in the grand scheme of things, uh, if you're Michigan, you're going to have to run the ball to have some success against Georgia. Alabama ran enough. I mean, Alabama's formula for this past game was a lot like Florida's in 2020 to 20. Um, they were going to attack with the pass, but they were also going to run enough. And when you look at this season, um, there were only four teams that had over 500, over 100 yards against Georgia. One was UAB, the other Florida, Missouri had 121, and Alabama had 115. And in all of those games, Florida's entire offense was predicated on the run. They were one of the leading rushing teams in the league, right behind Arkansas, who really had a hard time running against the dogs. But the Gators ran it 39 times. I mean, like Cowherd's saying, you're not going to run it down their throats, and even still, that's an adequate average per run at 4.1, but that's not exactly gashing people. So I think you're going to need to be effective um, on the ground, and it's hard to do that. But as I've said this entire time, it's not impossible. Um, you know, and some of these games are not apples to apples comparisons. I mean, for instance, Clemson had 2 yards rushing. They were just trying to survive, it seems like, more than anything. Alabama had 421 yards passing. I mean, that's a tremendous amount. Tennessee, 332. UAB had 127 yards rushing, but only 47 yards passing. I mean, that's just not going to work. So there's not been a game this season where Georgia had fewer than 100 yards rushing, but the team that held them down the most was Alabama. So there's going to be some things that have to be reconfigured. I mean, if you look back at this season from the South Carolina game until the Alabama game, only one game, which was the Missouri game, excuse me, the Kentucky game, did Georgia have fewer than 168 yards rushing. So Alabama controlled the game because Georgia didn't get away from them. Alabama controlled the game because they ran enough. It wasn't, like I said earlier, it wasn't unbelievable, and a lot of it was quarterback run, but they still ran for 4.4 yards a carry. That's a solid, certainly usable amount. And like if you look at Tennessee, they were 55 yards rushing for 36 carries. I mean, that's not going to work. Same thing with Charleston Southern, Georgia Tech. I mean, teams that were getting close to 30 carries, Vanderbilt, for instance. You know what? I'm not going to talk about Vanderbilt. Carolina, 90 yards on 34 carries. That's 2.6. Now, that's not good enough at all. So if you're Michigan, you need to kind of go around. I would say to me, they're going to have to run for 2 yards, excuse me, for 4 yards a clip. Now, Colin Cowherd doesn't think they can do that. And honestly, he's probably right. But, let's just see. I mean, because Michigan's run game is pretty solid. That is what a lot of what they do is predicated on. They're the number 10 rush team in the country, going at 5.32 yards a carry. That's pretty good, needless to say. But I don't know. It's one of these things where each game is just so different that it is hard to know for sure how it's going to wind up. In terms of yards per carry, Georgia and Michigan are right on top of each other with that 5.3 number. Um, and they're very similar in terms of defensively permitting certain things. For instance, uh, Michigan and Georgia, like Alabama, is number 2 in the country in yards per rush permitted, which is at 2.5. Georgia is right behind them at 2.6. Michigan is, down the list some, but near the top of the list for sure, probably in the top 30 or so, at 3.55. That could be the problem for Michigan, is that whereas both defenses are very stout with what they do, Georgia's better on the margins than Michigan in a lot of stuff they do, but probably the most important stuff. And, of course, Michigan's right in front of you right now if you're the Dogs. But, Cincinnati's a top, looks like 12-ish team in terms of stopping the run, 3.33 yards per run permitted. I mean, it's the usual suspects near the top: Alabama, Georgia, Clemson. I mean, they've been really good defensive teams. So it's not surprising that they would have the kind of yards per rush permitted that they've got. Uh, but Cowherd is saying, and I really would probably have to go back and look to see what Michigan's done the entire season against them. How many times have teams tried to run for 40 yards in a game? For the Dogs, that's not happened a lot. I mean, again, that is an indication that you are controlling the game. You get past, say, let's just say 35. Georgia's run the ball 35 times or more against UAB, Vanderbilt, Arkansas, Kentucky. They get 35 times. Tennessee. Those are the games that they've controlled the ball with that. This is how many times Georgia the other team has run for more than 30 attempts. UAB, Carolina, Florida, Mizzou, Tennessee, Charleston Southern, and Tech. So about half the teams tried, and it wasn't working. Like Clemson only tried 23 times. You got a lot of teams in here that only try to the 20s. Clemson, Vandy, Arkansas. I mean, that's not Arkansas's football game. That's not what they are. Auburn, Kentucky. These are all teams that want to run the ball. And then, of course, Alabama at 26. So it just, Georgia needs to play its game. And if what Colin Cowherd is talking about happens, Georgia is going to play its game and win. All right, let's talk about it more over on dogpost.com. Thanks for watching. We'll see you over on the website.